Good evening then everybody. What is happening? Hopefully you all are having a wonderful day today. So when it comes down to it, I thought of course that I would do this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by the boxing channel known as DontaesBoxingNation that of course I like to review here and there. But this video, and I've kind of already talked about this several times before, but this once again is going to be another conversation over Mr. Soul Canelo Alvarez. And the reason, once again, why I like to talk about Canelo Alvarez so much is because at the moment, at least out of any other of the LDBC and new media channels, he's probably the recipient of the most amount of narratives out of those channels. And the reason why that is because they don't want someone like Canelo Alvarez being remembered as an all-time great fighter, because they know that on paper, when you take a look at his career, the fact that he's defeated several A-grade fighters, probably even more than several A-grade fighters, but on top of that, that he is a four-weight division champion. He's been completely undisputed in one weight division. And on top of that, he is very skilled, at least for those of us that know that about boxing. Not saying, of course, he does not have certain holes in his game, but he is exceptionally skilled when it comes down to it. They know that they have to not only tear down Canelo Alvarez in one or two avenues, but they have to try to tear him down in a multitude of avenues. Because these guys' worst nightmare is that if someone like Canelo Alvarez or Usyk or Tyson Fury someday makes that of the top 10 pound for pound list of all time. That basically is what their worst fear is. So they know that when it comes to certain fighters like that, that they have to try and detract them and kind of almost, say it into existence that, oh, this guy isn't that good because of this and this. And that's why whenever it comes to Canelo Alvarez, no matter what win he gets, there's always some sort of bullshit excuse that comes out of Mr. Ego's mouth or Dante's mouth or Aki TV's mouth. But yet they don't seem to keep the same standards when it comes to Terrence Bud Crawford or Gervonta Tank Davis or Deontay Wilder or something like that of a sort. But we're going to talk about that throughout the whole entire video. But kind of to make a comparison, because Dante's Boxing Nation and a lot of these other guys, of course, they're claiming that Canelo Alvarez, that, he's a good to great fighter, but he's not what Marco Antonio Barrera was or Eric Morales or Chavez or, Josezito, or not Josezito, excuse me, but Ricardo Lopez, and all these other great Mexican fighters. I remember a very similar sentiment when Miguel Cotto was still active in boxing several years ago. And I remember a lot of people, a lot of the Puerto Ricans, or maybe not a lot of the Puerto Ricans, but maybe a lot of the people comparing Miguel Cotto to that of Felix Tito Trinidad. And a lot of people were saying, oh, you can't even compare Miguel Cotto to that of Felix Tito Trinidad. They were way different. The skill set was way different. Felix Tito Trinidad would destroy Miguel Cotto and all sort of stuff. But then, of course, once Miguel Cotto retired, people always take a look at it a lot more logically once you retire, because they already know that you're going to accomplish, pretty much everything you've accomplished, that there's no more left further to your career. And then many other people are saying, well, maybe Miguel Cotto is a little bit comparable to that of Felix Tito Trinidad. And this always happens with that of current day athletes. It always happens like this. In the NBA, I've seen it a million times with that of Stephen Curry. You had a lot of people compare Stephen Curry to that of Allen Iverson, and a lot of Allen Iverson fans, who, by the way, are some of the most batshit insane sports fans that I've ever met in my life. And it's led to Allen Iverson to become one of the most overrated athletes of all time when it comes down to it. You'll have a bunch of people saying that, oh, Allen Iverson, you can't even compare. Allen Iverson is way better than that of Stephen Curry. He's way better and way more valuable. When in reality, one person is way more valuable, but it's Stephen Curry. Because when you compare the championships, the MVPs, the postseason success, everything like that, it's really not even a contest. It just is what it is. But, those are just some comparisons. But I think when Canelo Alvarez retires, I think a lot of people, of course, are going to mention him as one of the great fighters that probably has ever fought in that of boxing. And they would be correct, because Canelo Alvarez, in my view, he is one of the greatest boxers of all time. Now, you don't have to call him the greatest of all time. And if in your view he's not the greatest Mexican fighter of all time, I would certainly understand it. But if we're going to go on these narratives of that Canelo Alvarez, that he's not a great fighter and that, he picked and cherry picked throughout a lot of his career, I just don't think that I can agree with that. Now, that's not me saying that Canelo Alvarez has not had certain clauses. That's not me saying that Canelo Alvarez, that he's not had certain matchups to where it's been more favorable towards him. But a lot of fighters have done that in the past. I don't understand why a lot of people are truly getting after Canelo Alvarez so much when this is the same thing that Floyd Mayweather Jr. used to do. This is the same thing that Sugar Ray Leonard used to do. This is the same thing that a bunch of other all-time great fighters used to do. Manny Pacquiao, a certain amount of other all-time great fighters. All Canelo Alvarez does at certain times is make sure that he gets the favorable more amount of money and that he's the one that usually has more, advantageous rights. It just is what it is. And that's what happens when you're the A side. I don't hear any of these people bitching about it when Deontay Wilder's the A side or when Errol Spence Jr. is the A side, but they seem to have a problem with it when it comes to Canelo Alvarez. Very particularly interesting. But anyways, when it comes down to it, I just thought that I would talk about it. Let's get straight into it. Let's see what Dante's Boxing Nation has to say. Let's get straight into it.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So, Canelo Alvarez was so excited after his win over Jermell Charlo that he said
And this is why Dante's Boxing Nation talks about Canelo Alvarez so much. Like, it's not even like Dante. It's not even like he just talks about him here and there. Dante makes a video about Canelo Alvarez every day. Like, every day. Like, that's how you know that, he's trying to speak something into existence. He's talking about Canelo Alvarez literally every day. I don't think there's been another fighter for the past several years that Dante's made more videos about.
Immediately after the fight, nobody beats this version of me. Well, apparently, a lot of professional boxers are disagreeing with Canelo Alvarez's assessment, and Shakur Stevenson is one of them.
Honestly, Canelo is a great fighter. I don't take nothing away from him. I see a lot of holes. That's why his coach kept saying to him, don't get overconfident, because you could tell he do get overly confident in it.
Like when he don't feel the power, he start making mistakes, you mean?
He just start throwing 1 or 2 big shots.
Right, loading
up. And he's loading up, standing right in front of you. Yeah. And it's not boxing at the time because it's okay, he just right in front of you, but...
I will say this, that I do slightly agree with that of Shakur Stevenson, that if you don't get Canelo Alvarez to respect you, that at times he can get kind of stuck in that little play style of kind of just, trying to bang you up against the ropes, and throwing 1 to 2 looping shots. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily one-dimensional, but I would say that, sometimes Canelo can get a little bit too stuck, within that type of style. But of course, when Canelo Alvarez needs to make adjustments, he usually always does. Now, of course, there's been a couple of fights that he's lost in his career, like against Floyd Mayweather Jr. and against Dimitri Bivol. Against Floyd Mayweather Jr., of course, Floyd is one of the all-time great fighters in boxing history. And on top of that, I just think that Floyd, and a lot of people, of course, would say that, the experiencing is an excuse. Well, I think if you're going to say that that's the only reason why Canelo Alvarez lost, I would say that that's an excuse, yes. But I think to say that, Mayweather, with all the experience that he had in championship-level fights, I think that it made him more prepared. And to say that Canelo Alvarez maybe was not perhaps at his peak, I don't think that that's necessarily an excuse. I just think that, it is what it is. And that just happens sometimes in boxing. It also kind of happens in that, of NBA basketball. Like that of, for those of you that were around during the 80s, I was not personally, but I do know that of the LA Lakers throughout that of the 80s. I think it was the 88, NBA Finals where, the LA Lakers, by the skin of their teeth, they were just able to beat the Detroit Pistons. They were not necessarily completely more talented than the Detroit Pistons, and they even had certain injuries, I believe, but they were able to win just purely off of experience because the Detroit Pistons, even though they had championship-level material, they had never really been on that big stage before. And I think for Canelo Alvarez that the skill set was a little bit too much for Floyd Mayweather Jr. I think that also on top of that the lights at the time were a little bit too bright for him. Not necessarily that he was afraid of Floyd Mayweather Jr. I just think that he was that much smarter at that point in time. I think that he's always been the more skilled boxer than Canelo in the first place anyway. But I think a big part of the reason why it was so dominant is because Canelo Alvarez, that I don't think that he had fought the list of fighters that Floyd Mayweather Jr. had been in with. And I think that when you're in there with that many experienced fighters, that I do think that it is going to help you. And I said the same thing with Canelo versus Jermell Charlo, that Canelo, it's going to be very hard to beat him because he has experience pretty much against every style on the planet.
I just think with Charlo, he wasn't giving him nothing back.
And I don't think that that's necessarily an excuse. I just think that it speaks to Mayweather's greatness of opponents on his resume. And I think it also speaks overall to the amount of intelligence and boxing IQ that he has.
So like I was saying, Canelo Alvarez, he believes that this is the best version of him against a junior middleweight that didn't even throw punches in the fight. The best version of a boxer is supposed to be someone that has to deal with adversity, someone that has to adjust. When someone is in a...
Right, but Canelo Alvarez does know how to adjust. If Canelo Alvarez didn't know how to adjust, he wouldn't have beat Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders. He wouldn't have beat Gennady Golovkin in the second match. He would have not been able to at least make it very close with Araceli Lara and win that fight. Of course, a lot of people would debate that he lost that fight, but it was at least very close. Like, you could see it potentially going either way, when it comes down to it. So, he would have not been able to beat Danny Jacobs and a couple of these other fighters. So, Canelo Alvarez, I'm not going to say that he's necessarily Floyd Mayweather Jr. or something necessarily, but it's very clear that Canelo Alvarez, that he still knows how to adjust. Once again, you can't have a fighter that pretty much is, 5'8" with a 71-inch arm reach, and he balloons up a little bit in weight, but he's not a guy that gets humongously big. Like, once again, him and Gervonta Tank Davis are very similar to where weight-wise, yeah, they could probably make it a little bit higher, but combined with their weight and their stature, because they're a little bit shorter, and in terms of reach, they're probably about, Gervonta's probably about a natural 135-pounder, whereas Canelo Alvarez, he's probably a natural middleweight, maybe a little bit above that. That's what Canelo Alvarez is. That's why I say you can't have this dude be a 4-weight division champion, have the list of names on his resume that he has, be undisputed in a weight class, fight repeated A-grade fighters, and just be a guy that doesn't know how to adjust whatsoever. That just doesn't make any sense.
With a guy that's trying to take their head off, and they figure out how to nullify that opponent's
And there wasn't much resistance in the Jermell Charlo fight, but I'm not really too surprised about that. And I said that there was a possibility of that happening because Jermell Charlo is just not as great as Canelo Alvarez. It's really not even a comparison. Jermell Charlo being in the ring with Canelo Alvarez, when you talk about the greatness levels, it pretty much is like Floyd Mayweather Jr. being in the ring with Carlos Baldomir. And certain people, they'll disagree with that, but at the end of the day, I've already stated this, and, perhaps this is an unpopular opinion, and this is not looked to be politically correct, but if Jermell Charlo was a Caucasian fighter, or if he was a Latin fighter, no one would be talking about this dude. I'm sorry. It just is what it is. No one would be talking about this dude whatsoever. The big part of the reason why Jermell Charlo and the Charlo brothers are so talked about is because they're looked at as Black American fighters, and they could be looked at as big fights on a lot of other people's resumes, which I agree with, but neither of them have ever been exceptional in my view.
Weapon and knock him out the way Crawford did to Errol.
And if you need proof of that, go ahead and take a look at Jermell Charlo against Tony Harrison in both fights. Go ahead and take a look at him against Brian Castano in both fights. The 5'6" Argentine when it came down to it. Take a look at him against Austin Trout. That's pretty much all the proof that you need.
Spence. And that's the reason why after Terrence Crawford's performance, you had many professional boxers come.
Well, here's the thing. Terrence Crawford didn't, have really much adversity in that fight because Errol Spence pretty much laid over. I mean, I'm not going to say that he laid over on purpose or that he just laid down on purpose. I think that Errol Spence tried to give it his best go, but you could have a legitimate debate that that Errol Spence Jr., that he didn't win a single goddamn round in that fight. So, I mean, if you want to say that all you want to, then go ahead, but then we should keep the same standards, if we're going to go into that, because we all know that if he's going to beat someone like a David Benavidez, that's going to be the new excuse. That, he must be overrated, that, he must have never been that good in the first place, and blah, blah, blah. Because we all know that he said that with Gennady Golovkin, but yet he does not say that with Errol Spence. Like I said, if you want to go by these standards, no problem. I would not personally agree with it, but it's very clear that Dante, that he's a very big hypocrite.
Out and say nobody is beating that version of Terrence Crawford, including fighters like Oscar De La Hoya, who said he sees Terrence Crawford moving up 3 weight classes and beating Canelo Alvarez easy. And he wasn't the only...
Well, that wouldn't happen. and I know, and there's no offense against Oscar, but everything overall with Oscar, I pretty much take with a grain of salt or a grain of rice, because there's no offense against Oscar, but ever since Canelo Alvarez left his stable, because his stable is pretty much on their last legs, it's pretty much on their last dying breath, he knows damn well that that's the big golden goose that he lost. That's the one that got away. And ever since then, he's been very pissed off at Canelo Alvarez, and him and Canelo have kind of went back and forth here and there. So it's no offense against Oscar, but I really don't trust anything that Oscar has to say involving Canelo Alvarez.
Professional fighter that said that. There were many. You see, Terrence Crawford didn't have to say, nobody beats this version of me. Other professional fighters, they said it for Crawford. Canelo, on the other hand, He says it when he's in a ring with a junior middleweight that's showing zero resistance. If you notice, Shakur.
Well, he's in there with a guy, once again, that could easily fight a middleweight. And once again, Canelo is not a natural super middleweight. He just never has been. Now, he's more accustomed to the weight now, but Canelo Alvarez has never been a natural super middleweight. He just never has been. The dude is 5'8". It just is what it is. Now, once again, he rehydrates a bit girthier, than some other guys, at around 180 to 185. But there are some other guys that probably could fight at that weight too. Like Gennady Golovkin. If you take a look at Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin was even thicker or bigger than what Canelo Alvarez was. But Canelo was able to beat him in that fight. Danny Jacobs was bigger than what Canelo Alvarez was, and Canelo was able to beat him. Caleb Plant was a little bit bigger than what Canelo Alvarez was. Canelo was able to beat him. All right, when it comes down to it. Now, once again, Canelo, he's a pretty girthy dude, for his size. But at the end of the day, once again, he's not like a Mike Tyson guy when it comes down to it. So, Canelo Alvarez, at the end of the day, once again, I still have to give him a lot of props because he's a dude that probably should be fighting at around the middleweight division. But because he's so exceptionally skilled, he was able to win titles even a couple of weight classes above that. So I have to give him a lot of props.
For Stevenson, he was talking about Canelo Alvarez's many flaws. The fact that he will stand right in front of you, throwing one hard shot at a time. This is something that Canelo has been doing his entire career, which is rather ironic because, of course, there was a time when a lot of black fighters, they were looking for the acceptance of...
Well, the thing is about Canelo in that Jermell Charlo fight is that, once again, if you don't give Canelo Alvarez some sort of reason to respect you, he's pretty much just going to try to wear you down and go after the kill. You have to give him some sort of reason to respect you. And then you're going to see a little bit more out of Canelo Alvarez. And that's just what it is. All right, that's pretty much every fighter. Like, if you take a look at Canelo versus Golovkin, he's probably going to look more exceptional in certain skill sets because Golovkin had a multitude of things to threaten Canelo with. Same with Danny Jacobs and same with a couple of other fighters. The thing was with Jermell Charlo is that there was just nothing he had. There's just nothing he had. Because not only was he moving up in weight, but he's just not an exceptional fighter. He never has been.
Media, and they were all praised.
And I've been saying this for years, and I had certain people overall say, oh, you're being too hard on Jermell Charlo. How do you not have Jermell Charlo within your top 10 pound per pound? Jermell Charlo, all blah, blah, blah. This is why. You know why? Because I've seen Jermell Charlo for what he truly was this whole entire time. A guy that is a very good fighter, borderline great fighter, never exceptional. Never exceptional.
Canelo, saying that he was pound for pound the best fighter in the world, etc., etc.
Because I'm sorry, but you're like what, 5'11", 6 foot, probably could easily fight at the middleweight division, and Canelo was not really even a natural super middleweight anyway. And when it comes down to it, you go up and you pretty much lose every single round like that. You landed about 3 flush punches the whole entire fight. Like, come on, no.
But meanwhile, he still had these same flaws. He still showed these flaws in all of his fights. This is the reason why he was being outboxed.
Well, the main flaws that Canelo Alvarez has, even when he's at his best, is that his feet sometimes are a little bit uncoordinated, or he does not have the best feet, That's really one of his main problems. That probably is his main problem. And on top of that, his stamina issues. But other than that, Canelo Alvarez pretty much is about, he's great pretty much in every category. At his best, at his absolute best, I'm talking about. So we're talking about probably from when he was fighting Miguel Cotto all the way, to that of Caleb Plant. That's what I'm thinking of when I talk about Canelo at his absolute peak and at his absolute best. He's a great defensive fighter. He has great head movement. He has great counter-punching ability. He has great boxing IQ. He establishes range pretty decently well. He'll move in and outside of range. He has great feints, good parries. When it comes down to it, Canelo Alvarez is a great fighter. No doubt about it.
By Amir Khan,
and on top
before
of that,
he knocked him out.
On top of that, athletically, Canelo Alvarez is an all-time great athlete. He has great power, good speed. The only thing, once again, athletically wise, he's probably not good at is stamina.
This is the reason why he was being outboxed by Billy Joe Saunders. He was being out. This is the reason why he was being outboxed by Amir Khan before he knocked him out. This is the reason why he was being outboxed by Billy Joe Saunders. He was being out.
Well, no, he wasn't being outboxed by either of those guys. Those guys had their moments in the fight, and they were winning certain rounds against Canelo Alvarez, but they weren't outboxing Canelo Alvarez. But, of course, Dante has to go with this narrative once again because he has to make you think that Canelo Alvarez, that he's the Caucasian version, the Hispanic Caucasian version of Deontay Wilder.
Boxed by Caleb Plant before he stopped all of these opponents, because he always showed those exact same flaws that he shows in the ring today. Now, this is not to suggest that Canelo is not a really good fighter, because he is a really good fighter. And it does.
Well, Canelo wasn't just a really good fighter. Once again, he's an all-time great fighter. And I think a lot of people are more than likely going to admit that once he retires. But, hey, it is what it is. A lot of current day athletes, they have to deal with this. It's not just Canelo Alvarez. This is par for the course when you're an all-time great fighter or an all-time great athlete. This happens with LeBron James. It happens with Novak Djokovic. It happens with Tom Brady. It happens with all these guys. When it came to Tom Brady, there's a certain amount of guys that were saying that he's just a system quarterback, and without Bill Belichick, he wouldn't be shit. Then he wins one with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. When it comes to Novak Djokovic, he's a one-dimensional player, and he only beats Nadal and Federer when they're old. All this other bullshit. Same thing with Canelo Alvarez. So once again, if you're a great, that's how you know usually that you're at the top of the level. Because fighters who are not at the top of the level, they don't ever have to deal with shit like that. You'll never hear people discredit Jermell Charlo that way, because they know there's no reason to.
Take a really good fighter to beat him. The only point I'm making, the only point Shakur Stevenson is making, is Canelo Alvarez is the same fighter that lost to Bivol. He's the same.
He also has to try to make this point because he knows that if Canelo Alvarez, that eventually if he accomplishes even more in his career, that people are going to try to argue Canelo Alvarez is the greatest fighter of all time. Now, I don't even think that I would even agree with that, even though I have a great amount of respect for Canelo Alvarez. I mean, he could always be in the debate. I'm not a person that has ever said that this, in my view, is the unanimous GOAT or the unanimous greatest of all time, because there are different eras, and, different skill sets, blah, 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 and different ways of handling things. But Canelo could at least make my top 20 to top 10 of all time. You could even debate that he's already there, to be honest with you. I would say, at the very least, he's within my top 30 to top 40 fighters of all time. That's at a minimum, when it comes down to it. He could very easily be within my top 20 fighters of all time. He's right there.
Fighter that lost to Floyd Mayweather, and he's the same fighter.
But Canelo Alvarez, as you can tell, he has improved over the years. Now does he still have some of the same flaws as what he did as when he lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., like not having great feet and at times having a problem blocking the jab and stamina issues? Yeah, of course, he still has some of those issues. But, once again, Dante always tries to make this point that Terrence Crawford and that every fighter that he's liked, that, they've changed and that they've become more skilled over the years. But the only fighters that apparently are the same fighters or haven't gotten more skilled over the years are fighters like Canelo or other fighters that he doesn't tend to like. And that's not a coincidence.
Fought Adeslani Lara. The only difference is, in this fight, he was fighting against a much smaller opponent that he outweighed.
But I definitely think that Canelo's become a much better version, or at least a better version of himself ever since the Adeslani Lara fight. He cuts off the ring a lot better. He blocks the jab a lot better. He paces himself better. When it comes down to it, I think that he's just a smarter fighter. You must also remember that when Canelo Alvarez was in the ring against a certain amount of these fighters like Lara, and Mayweather, he was like 23 to 25 years old. Now that's not me necessarily giving an excuse, but now of course he had a lot of experience, on his professional boxing record. But a lot of those fighters before he fought Austin Trout, they weren't really anything that would have gained him great fighting experience. They were just fighters that he pretty much was able to run through. Before he fought Austin Trout, Canelo Alvarez did not really have that great of a resume. But once he started fighting guys like Austin Trout, Mayweather, Lara, that was when his resume started to really get uplifted.
By 15 to 20 pounds, and didn't even have to worry about getting hit with anything because Jermell Charlo wasn't punching.
Well, I believe Jermell Charlo actually rehydrated about the same weight as Canelo Alvarez. I believe they both rehydrated at 185. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. That's why I say Jermell Charlo, a lot of people are saying that, it was such a size disadvantage. No, it wasn't. Don't get me wrong. Jermell Charlo he had a size disadvantage. Yes, he was, but it wasn't as major as what a lot of people are trying to say. And once again, isn't this the same guy that wanted Vasily Lomachenko to fight Terrence Bud Crawford? Even though Lomachenko, he pretty much, he rehydrates at like 140 to 145 at times until he went up to the 135-pound weight division. And Crawford is like, 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach and rehydrates at 160 plus. Isn't that the same guy who also wanted Lomachenko to fight Pacquiao and Terrence Bud Crawford, Isn't that interesting? Or Canelo fight Usyk. Once again, the LDBC and new media, that little, pro-black cult, the biggest hypocrites probably in all of that is sports talk. It just is what it is.
Have noticed recently a lot of black fighters have withdrawn from constantly overpraising Canelo Alvarez. Now, it could be because old media.
And DontaesBoxingNation says overpraising that of Canelo Alvarez. What does overpraising necessarily mean of that of Canelo Alvarez? What does that mean? Because the only thing that Gervonta Tank Davis and Devin Haney and Jamal Charlo and Jamel Charlo and some of these other black fighters, the only thing that they were saying is that they believe that Canelo Alvarez was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. None of these guys were saying that they believe Canelo was greater than Floyd Mayweather Jr. None of these guys said that they believe Canelo was the greatest of all time. I don't even think any one of them said that they believe that Canelo is the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. So what is overpraising Canelo Alvarez? The thing is that Dante, once again, is showing you his true colors. He does not even want Canelo Alvarez to be remembered as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Once again, that's how you know the marksmanship of a true hater, is that once again the finish line is always going to change. There's always something wrong. There's never any consistency.
Because old media is no longer praising Canelo Alvarez like he's the Michael Jordan of the sport, trying to completely mislead the.
Once again, I think to say that whoever the #1 pound-for-pound fighter is, to call them the Michael Jordan of the sport, I think that that's a little bit disingenuous and misleading. Because when you talk about Michael Jordan or Tom Brady or something like that, you're talking about debatably as the greatest in that particular sport of all time. So I don't think that calling the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, I don't think that that would even be appropriate to call them the Michael Jordan of the sport. I think what you would have to call them, if we were comparing it in basketball, if we were to compare this generation like the LeBron James of the sport or something like that. But of course, LeBron is not the best player anymore. Right now, you'd probably have to say Nikola Jokic, or Giannis Antetokounmpo, or Stephen Curry, like one of those guys.
Public in the sport of boxing. Or it could be simply that a lot of the black fighters that were repeating old media's talking points and the race fans' talking points about Canelo Alvarez, maybe they're starting to realize no matter what they say about Canelo Alvarez, Lomachenko, Tyson Fury, or whoever, no matter what they say about them, those race fans still feel the same way about the black fighters that praise them. This is why I always say it's better to speak the truth, whatever the truth is. If you really believe this guy is that good or you believe that he's overrated, it's better to speak the truth, because no matter what you say, they're always going to feel the same way about you. Because
right, but Dante, this is the thing. They were speaking in their opinion what the truth was, because they realized that Canelo Alvarez, that he's an exceptionally skilled fighter, and that you cannot accomplish what he's accomplished and not be a great fighter. But every single time that a compliment is thrown out there by a black fighter to Tyson Fury or Usyk or Canelo Alvarez or Inoue, it's always disingenuous. It's always because they're trying to appease that of the race fans. It's never because that's what they truly think. So what Dante is basically trying to do is that he's trying to embarrass some of the black fighters out there and saying that you're only saying that because you want to appease that of the racists. When really, once again, I've already told people this. Dante and a lot of these other channels, they're really the ones overall that are trying to fight fire with fire. They're the ones that are constantly worrying about what the racists are saying. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hating on fighters like Canelo Alvarez and posting a video literally on a daily basis.
Been about boxing. In fact, I can tell you by firsthand experience, racist people, they actually respect you more when you're willing to speak the truth unapologetically than you catering to them. This is the reason why so many racist fans, they love to watch my videos and they watch every single video that I make. I don't even want these racists on my channel, but they won't stay away. I'll even see some of these guys every once in a while in my comment section. They'll post a racist comment, and then if I respond to them, they'll respond back by saying, "Hey man, I'm a big fan of your channel. I've been watching your channel for the last 6-7 years, whatever, right?" And that right there is the...
Dante always makes me laugh whenever he tries to separate himself with the quote-unquote racist. Dante, you're about one of the biggest racists potentially out there. That's really the main point of all your narratives. Dante calling anybody a racist, no matter the demographic, no matter the skin color, is like R. Kelly calling Kevin Spacey a child predator. Like that. That's basically what the equivalent of that is. Like, bro, like you could not be calling the kettle, black anymore.
The power of speaking the whole truth. When these racists come to my channel, it's like going to the doctor's office. Your doctor might not tell you what you want to hear, but at the end of the day, the doctor is going to tell you the truth. And you got no choice but to go see him. With that being said, once again, we're no longer hearing Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, or even Javante Tank Davis overly praise Canelo Alvarez. In fact, Shakur...
There's that word once again where they say overly praise Canelo Alvarez. All these fighters said at one point in time was that they believe that Canelo Alvarez is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. That's all they said. like Dante is trying to act like they were constantly posting videos of that. They were, basically, washing Canelo Alvarez's balls in the shower or something like that. Like, dude, all they said was that he was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. That's all they said. And Dante couldn't even handle that.
Or is even exposing some of Canelo Alvarez's holes in his game. But it's so ironic because while fighters like Shakur just start doing this, the Mexican fighters, they've been saying this about Canelo the entire time. While old media was trying to promote Canelo Alvarez as the Michael Jordan of the sport.
Well, that's no offense against some of those Mexican fighters, but not only can you tell that a certain amount of them that they're kind of still living in the past with that of Chavez and some of the other fighters like Salvador Sanchez, but some of them just have a major personal problem with him. Like when it comes to Juan Manuel Marquez, like that dude had his panties in a twist about Canelo Alvarez. Like I don't know if Canelo Alvarez fucked his wife or something, but every single time that Juan Manuel Marquez talks about Canelo Alvarez, like there's never anything good to say.
Mexican boxing.
But you notice that all the Mexican fighters that debatably, or all the fighters that are looked at as all-time great fighters, they all say that Canelo Alvarez is an all-time great fighter or a great fighter. This includes Mayweather, this includes Sugar Ray Leonard, this includes Roberto Duran, this includes Chavez Sr. You notice that all the Mexican fighters that have a problem with Canelo Alvarez are all the ones that could potentially be jealous. Like that of, possibly Marco Antonio Barrera or Oscar De La Hoya, or that of Juan Manuel Marquez. If we're really going to go there, once again, Canelo surpassed all those guys.
Have always exposed the fact that Canelo Alvarez is often fighting guys much smaller than he is, and when he fights someone...
Which guys is he fighting that are often much smaller than what he is? Within the past 10 years, which fighters has Canelo Alvarez fought that have been oftentimes much more smaller than what he is? You have Amir Khan, you have Josesito Lopez, and I think overall that you have, Jamel Charlo, and I wouldn't even call Jamel Charlo way smaller. That's about it.
His exact same size or even a little bit bigger than he is, he ends up losing like he lost to Bivol. Bivol, if you can...
Once again, and that's not true, and that's someone that either A, once again, is trying to promote a narrative or doesn't know about boxing or both. Because Caleb Plant, Danny Jacobs, Gennady Golovkin, Sergey Kovalev, Chavez Jr., Callum Smith, Gennady Golovkin, Danny Jacobs, like I said, all those guys were bigger than Canelo Alvarez, every single one of them.
Compare Canelo Alvarez, this is something that Mexican fans often do. They always compare Canelo to Floyd Mayweather. Well, if you're comparing Canelo to Floyd Mayweather, Canelo was supposed to do to Bivol the same thing that Floyd Mayweather did to Canelo. Floyd Mayweather was in the ring with a fighter that was much bigger than him, 15 to 20 pounds bigger than him, much younger than him. After Floyd had already moved up 5 weight classes, he's still fighting against a guy much bigger than him. And Floyd Mayweather put on one of his best performances while being handicapped.
Floyd wasn't handicapped in that fight. Just stop. Floyd was at the best point in his career. He was 36 years old, but he was still a very great 36 years old. He was still the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. And if we're really going to talk about handicaps in that fight, Canelo Alvarez was the one that had the rehydration and the weight drain in that fight. It wasn't Floyd Mayweather Jr. So Floyd did not even really fight Canelo Alvarez at the full 154-pound weight, because Canelo Alvarez had to fight at 152 pounds coming into that fight. Now, in my view, is it that much, of a viable excuse to lose that badly? No, Canelo still should have made it at least 8 rounds to 4. If you want to argue that he's on the same level as Floyd, or at least was at the time. But once again, if we're going to talk about handicaps, it was Canelo, I believe, that came in there with a rehydration and a weight drain. It just is what it is.
actually closer in size to Bivol, way more closer in size to Bivol than Floyd Mayweather was to Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo got completely dominated. So maybe when Canelo Alvarez said, "No one beats this version of me," he really meant no junior middleweight beats this version of me. Because if Canelo truly...
Well, the thing is about the Dimitri Bivol fight once again, and Dimitri is a great fighter. The thing is that Dimitri Bivol was probably about 2 weight classes bigger than Canelo. Now, Canelo, of course, weight-wise, was comparable to Dimitri Bivol, but he really was a little bit too bloated in that fight. He was a little bit too bloated in that fight. He gained a little bit too much muscle mass, in my view, in that fight, and he had no stamina whatsoever. He had none. So in a rematch, he would have to be a little bit lighter. He would have to look like just like he did in the Jamel Charlo fight. That's what he would have to look like if he was going to stand a chance against Dimitri Bivol. But the thing is that Bivol is probably about 2 weight classes bigger than that of Canelo Alvarez, and on top of that, probably around just as skilled. Like I said, Dimitri Bivol, you know, a lot of these dudes that don't know shit about boxing, they don't know Dimitri Bivol like that. Dimitri is a great fighter.
believe no one beats that.
But of course, once again, if you're going to argue, you know, that if Canelo was on the same level as Floyd Mayweather Jr., you could debate that, of course, Canelo should have won that fight. I don't really have a problem with that. The problem, of course, that I have is that when we're trying to allege that Canelo hasn't improved as a fighter at all within the past 10 years, and he accomplishes all these things, like, that just doesn't make any sense.
Version of him, he would have called out Bivol. Not calling him out now.
But yet, Jamel Charlo, he's the one that improves even after losing to Tony Harrison and Brian Gastano and, you know, all these other guys. Or should have lost to Brian Gastano. You know, Jamel Charlo improves within a 1-year stance. You know, but Canelo, he hasn't improved at all within the past 10 years. That just doesn't make any damn sense.
Not saying he wants to fight him next because, of course, he has this deal with PBC. But he could have made it very clear, before I retire, I am going to fight Bivol because this is the...
I think Canelo Alvarez more than likely has said that before, I believe. But I think that if Canelo is going to go after Dimitri Bivol, that he should probably try and beat David Benavidez first. And if you're not able to get past David Benavidez, you're not going to be able to beat Dimitri Bivol. Because Dimitri Bivol, in terms of skills, he's a decent amount better than David Benavidez.
Best version of me, and I'm going to show you guys what I do when I'm at...
And that's why I say, if David Benavidez and Dimitri Bivol were to get in a fight, good luck to David Benavidez. Because David Benavidez does this shit where he throws a bunch of punches and bunches and he tries to wear you down. Dimitri Bivol don't wear down. He has great stamina. He has greater power than what David Benavidez has. When it comes down to it, he has greater hand speed. And he just has greater foot movement. He has greater feet. He has greater boxing IQ. And he can fight in more of a multitude of ways. Once again, David Benavidez, I'm going to be very interested to see in that Canelo Alvarez fight or Demetrius Andrade fight how he does. Because I'm not going to say that he can't fight in a multitude of ways, but he fights a lot of the times very much in that pressurized style. And I want to see if someone's able to get him out of there, how well he does.
My best.
Because a lot of the times, bully fighters, which is what David Benavidez is, when bully fighters, when all of a sudden their main game plan ain't working, they pretty much just go into a corner and they pretty much just cry and then they end up pretty much just submitting. So we'll see. Or they end up not being able to change the game plan. So we'll see.
That's what he was supposed to say. But of course, Canelo didn't say that because he does not want to fight Bivol again. Bivol wanted to come down to 168 and challenge Canelo for all of his belts. And Canelo Alvarez said that's not going to happen because he knew how embarrassing that would be if Bivol came all the way down to 168 and then took all of his titles. It would be even worse.
Well, in my view, it wouldn't even be the best move for that at Canelo Alvarez. Because why would you want Dimitri Bivol, who possibly could make 168 pounds, why would you want him to come down to 168 potentially? And if he does beat you, take all your titles at 168 so you no longer have a David Benavidez fight, you know, or make more money or potentially have greater fights. It just would make no sense. You know, of course, if you're rematching Bivol, you want it to happen at 175. But I think that if that fight happens, it's going to be after Canelo Alvarez, after he faces David Benavidez, and probably one more PBC opponent.
Then the first loss, which showed you Canelo Alvarez, he had zero confidence that he could beat Bivol. And he knew that version of Canelo Alvarez that just beat a junior middleweight still would not beat Bivol, even if he was at 168. Canelo Alvarez.
I would still give Canelo Alvarez a much greater chance of beating Dimitri Bivol than in that first fight if he looked like what he did in the Jamel Charlo fight. Because in that Bivol fight, he looked like he had no stamina. So like I said, Canelo in that Dimitri Bivol fight, he's going to have to be really watch out of his stature. And he's going to have to make sure, you know, once again, that he doesn't get too muscle bound.
Alvarez's own weight class. With that being said, let me reiterate the point. While you have black fighters that are now not afraid to criticize Canelo Alvarez, Mexican fighters.
Well, there are certain black fighters overall that have never been afraid to criticize Canelo Alvarez. I don't know where this narrative comes from. You know, Terrence Crawford has always criticized Canelo Alvarez. You know, Mayweather has criticized Canelo Alvarez at times. There's been other black fighters who have criticized Canelo Alvarez. I don't get this narrative of black fighters being afraid to criticize Canelo. But, you know, he tries to do that once again because any praise that they set upon Canelo, it's not evidence or proof that Canelo is one of the best fighters in the world. It's because they're afraid of what the racists or what the race fans are going to say, and that they're trying to appease the other demographics. You know, even though these same fighters talk about a lot of the times about the racist fan base and the racist management, you know, which might rub, you know, some of those guys the wrong way, and that narrative really makes no fucking sense whatsoever. But that's the narrative that Dante is trying to push.
And almost all of them have been doing this since day one, no matter how much it pissed off Canelo Alvarez or Mexican fans in general. And it's not just the Mexican fighters that have been criticizing Canelo, it's been Mexican reporters straight from Mexico as well. A lot of them have been completely fearless. Let me play this clip of what former champion Carlos Cadras said. He said this right before the Jamel Charlo fight. This is pretty much the feeling that a lot of the Mexican fighters had going into this fight. Eric Morales, he said something analogous to this as well. So I'm going to play the interview, but before I play the interview, I want to actually read the transcript of exactly what he said. So the reporter, he asked Carlos, he says, Canelo Alvarez versus Jamal Charlo, do you like that Canelo chose an opponent who is undisputed champion, but is 2 divisions below? Carlos Cadras, he says, yes, the truth is that I don't like that. That's why I think Canelo, people haven't followed him as an idol because he always looks for a lot of advantages in his fights, right? He puts a lot of clauses.
Now listen to what Carlos Cuadras just said. He said that's why a lot of people don't follow Canelo Alvarez as an idol, which you really shouldn't be following any of these athletes as an idol in the first place. But that's the reason why Carlos Cuadras has said shit like that, because Canelo probably does shit that rubs them the certain wrong way, and they don't want to compare him to Chavez or Salvador Sanchez, blah, 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 the guys of their youth. I seen the exact same thing with Miguel Cotto and Felix Tito Trinidad. When he was around, I seen a bunch of Puerto Ricans say that you can't even compare him to Felix Tito Trinidad. Felix Tito Trinidad would have never done this. He would have never done this. Felix Tito Trinidad was a god, over when he was around, and that's the problem, because they worship these guys.
He's the man of clauses. So I feel that he should. I thought he was going to get Jamal, the big brother, right? And the reporter, he responds, yeah.
Well, he wanted Jamal Charlo. Jamal Charlo had to back out because apparently he was too depressed, which I don't have a problem with. But isn't that interesting when Ryan Garcia pulls out of a fight, it's because he's weak and he's using it as an excuse. But Jamal Charlo, he pulls out and, we all hope he gets better. Once again, no similar standards whatsoever.
That's the 160-pound one. Carlos, he says at 160, and he's moving him up anyway, right? So I think that's what hasn't let him be the idol to all the people. He hasn't faced the best. And you see, guys...
Well, Canelo Alvarez has faced some of the best, but it is what it is. But once again, Canelo Alvarez, he's really going to have to get in the ring with David Benavidez. That really is the main guy that people are going to be looking at next.
I've always told you guys, even though it's subjective, you could easily say that Jamel Charlo, that win, that's the biggest win, the best win of Canelo Alvarez's career in terms of winning with no controversy and beating a legitimate champion that was on the pound-for-pound list.
Well, no. The thing is about Canelo Alvarez is that the biggest win of his career right now, and probably always will be that Gennady Golovkin win. Because I don't think that he ever fought a fighter that was greater or more skilled or more intelligent than that of Gennady Golovkin. Other than that, and maybe Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Dmitry Bivol, at least a fighter that would have been comparable in size. And Bivol, of course, I think was a decent amount bigger. So it is what it is. But when it comes down to it, that is probably the greatest win. But of course, Dante wants to give you this shit about, that was with controversy, so we can't even count that. Even though it was a close fight that could have went either way, and a fight that more than likely Canelo Alvarez did pull out, if you rewatch the fight. But Dante wants to go by these standards. Hey, no problem. If you want to go by those standards, no problem at all. Stop counting Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s wins over Jose Luis Castillo, because many people see it as controversial. Stop counting Andre Ward's wins over Sergey Kovalev, because people take a look at him as controversial. We cannot count Sugar Ray Leonard's draw over Tommy Hearns or his win over that of Roberto Duran, because Duran really was a natural lightweight, and he moved up 2 weight classes and beat Sugar Ray Leonard in the first place, so he never should have really, won against Sugar Ray Leonard in the first place. Let's stop saying that Bernard Hopkins is a great fighter, because the 2 biggest wins of his career are over De La Hoya and Felix Tito Trinidad. Against the other fighters like Roy and Joe Calzaghe, he never usually beat those guys, at least the potential #1 pound-for-pound fighters in the sport. So if we're going to go by those standards, no problem. But then you better go with those other standards too, along with those fighters. We all know Dante's not going to do that, though.
If Canelo's biggest win of his career is against a junior middleweight, that doesn't say a whole lot about Canelo Alvarez. Because he has 60 fights and now he's, 30?
And if we're really talking about a fighter that actually is considered an all-time great fighter, but their biggest win was over a guy that was decently smaller than them, at least in a weight division where he probably never should have been in the first place, that really is Bernard Hopkins. Because ain't no way you're going to sit here and tell me that Bernard Hopkins and Felix Tito Trinidad, that those guys are in the same fucking weight class. Like, get the hell out of here.
32 years old. Now, you can pick any fighter and say,
And that's not me saying that, he does not get credit for beating Felix Tito Trinidad, but come on. Bernard is a dude that could easily make 168 to 175.
This guy was the biggest win. But no matter who you pick, it still exposes Canelo Alvarez's resume. Once again, if you were to say Golovkin was his biggest win, that fight ended in controversy. The first 2 fights ended in controversy.
Well, no, the first fight is the only one that was majorly controversial. The second fight was a great fight that could have went either way, but many people thought that Canelo had just pulled it off. It is what it is.
Say Austin Trout.
And isn't it very interesting, once again, Dante and a lot of these other channels, they said they had Canelo winning, but then now that Canelo was the main threat and no longer Golovkin, they say that, oh, well, we can't count that for Canelo Alvarez. They always change the narrative depending on what fits the day.
Was his biggest win. Even though, once again, Austin Trout was not considered pound for pound one of the best fighters in the world. And if we say his biggest win was against Austin Trout, then that doesn't say too much about Canelo Alvarez's career when he has 60 fights. And that fight happened 10 years ago? Which means he hasn't had a fight in the last 10 years to match that performance that he had against Austin Trout. And then you got to give a lot of credit to Floyd Mayweather for even making that fight happen, because it was Floyd Mayweather that told Canelo Alvarez's people, you have to fight someone before we fight so we can really promote the fight as a serious fight. If you haven't fought anyone, then it's going to take credit away from the win. So they proposed him fighting against Austin Trout. That was the only way Canelo could get the Floyd Mayweather fight. And it worked, because the way Floyd Mayweather easily dismantled Canelo Alvarez, the Austin Trout fight made the Floyd Mayweather win even bigger. And if you're going to say that was Canelo's best performance of his career, then that also takes away the ridiculous 23-year-old excuse saying that Canelo, he didn't have any experience going into the Mayweather fight. We all know.
Well, I definitely agree that that's a little bit of an invalid excuse, but like I've always said, I don't think that Canelo was quite at his peak at that time. That's not me saying that Floyd is not the more skilled or the greater fighter. I think that he is. But, at the end of the day, I do think that Floyd Mayweather Jr. having all those championship fights, with the likes of Cotto, with the likes of Judah, with the likes of De La Hoya, with the likes of Ricky Hatton, all those guys. Of course, none of them were the size of Canelo Alvarez, but at the end of the day, having repeated big fight after big fight like that, it certainly will give you a lot of experience.
A 23-year-old Floyd Mayweather would do to a 36-year-old Canelo Alvarez, especially if Floyd Mayweather was naturally the bigger opponent, fighting against a natural welterweight in Canelo Alvarez. We've already seen a 23-year-old Devin Haney beat a 35-year-old Lomachenko, and a 23-year-old Teofimo Lopez beat a 34-year-old, or whatever he was at the time, Lomachenko. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up, and I'm going to leave you guys with the audio clip of what Carlos Cadras said about Canelo Alvarez.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. I just thought that I would talk on that. But like I said, Dante has to try really hard to discredit Canelo Alvarez at every angle. And although there were some points that I agreed with here and there, about 90% of them are pretty much going to be him hating on Canelo Alvarez and him trying to tell you about how he's just this average Mexican fighter and how he's not truly a great fighter. That's all Dante's main goal is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it. I just thought that I would talk about that. Thought it was particularly interesting. And that's pretty much about it for today. But we'll see where Canelo Alvarez goes from here. Because, a lot of people, of course, are going to be claiming from the fight the winner of that Andre versus Benavidez fight. And if he doesn't take it next, it may not be quite as big of a deal. He can probably get away with facing, someone like that of Jamal Charlo or something like that. But he is going to have to fight David Benavidez sometime next year. No doubt about it. One of those two fights is going to have to be over David Benavidez. No doubt about it. Because I assume, at least in my view, that more than likely that David Benavidez is going to beat Demetrius Andre. But we'll see. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.